Olivia's beloved horse Rusty appeared in the church doorway during her wedding, walking with deliberate purpose down the aisle toward her. A chill ran through her body as the antique silver locket beneath her dress suddenly grew hot against her skin. No one among the stunned, silent guests could possibly imagine what was about to happen as a century-old promise demanded fulfillment. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The spring breeze carried the scent of wildflowers as Olivia Jenkins stood before the full-length mirror in her childhood bedroom. The white wedding dress she wore was everything she had dreamed of since she was a little girl playing in the meadows of Willow Creek, simple yet elegant, with delicate lace that traced her shoulders and cascaded down to the floor like frozen waterfalls. Her auburn hair was styled in loose curls, adorned with tiny white flowers that matched her bouquet waiting on the bed. In just 2 hours, she would walk down the aisle of the old stone church that had stood at the center of their rural town for over a century. "You look absolutely beautiful," her mother said, standing at the doorway with tears glistening in her eyes. Sarah Jenkins was a woman whose face told the story of years spent working under the sun, her smile lines deepening as she approached her daughter. "Thank you, Mom," Olivia whispered, suddenly overwhelmed with emotion. This was the culmination of her relationship with Daniel, the town veterinarian who had stolen her heart 3 years ago when he had come to tend to her father's livestock. Outside the window of the Jenkins farmhouse, green pastures stretched toward the horizon, dotted with grazing cattle and the occasional oak tree providing shade from the midday sun. The farm had been in Olivia's family for 4 generations, and though she had left for college and spent a few years in the city, the pull of Willow Creek had brought her back home. It was as if the land itself had called to her, reminding her where she truly belonged. In the barn about a 1/4 mile from the main house, an aging chestnut stallion named Rusty stood quietly in his stall. He had been Olivia's companion since she was 13, a gift from her father after he had recovered from an injury that nearly claimed his life. For 14 years, they had shared an unbreakable bond. Rusty had been there through her teenage heartbreaks, her departure for college, and eventually, her return. He had been the first to meet Daniel, cautiously assessing the newcomer as Olivia introduced them on that fateful day. "He doesn't usually warm up to strangers," Olivia had said, surprised as Rusty immediately nuzzled Daniel's outstretched hand. "He must sense something special in you." Daniel had smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Animals have a way of seeing past our outer shells. They judge us by what's in our hearts." It was that moment, watching the gentleness in Daniel's touch as he examined the older horse, that had made Olivia's heart skip a beat. A feeling she couldn't explain had washed over her, like the universe whispering that this man would change her life forever. Now, on her wedding day, Olivia couldn't help but think of Rusty. She hadn't visited him that morning, breaking their daily ritual for the first time in years due to the chaos of wedding preparations. A pang of guilt shot through her heart. "I should go see Rusty before we leave for the church," she said, carefully lifting the hem of her dress. "Olivia, there's no time," her mother protested. "The photographer will be here any minute and we still need to finish your makeup." Olivia hesitated, torn between tradition and the pull of her heart. "I just feel like I should. He's been a part of every important day of my life." Sarah sighed, understanding the bond between her daughter and the horse. "Your father checked on him this morning. He's fine, dear. You'll have a lifetime to spend with Rusty after today." Reluctantly, Olivia nodded and turned back to the mirror. Her mother was right. There was still so much to do. The distant sound of cars arriving signaled that wedding guests were beginning to gather at the house for pre-ceremony photographs. Meanwhile, in the old barn, Rusty stood with his ears perked, as if listening to the unusual activity around the farmhouse. Thomas Jenkins, Olivia's father, had indeed checked on him earlier, giving him fresh hay and a quick brush. But it wasn't the same as Olivia's visits. The old horse seemed to sense something significant was happening, his usual calm demeanor replaced with restless movements as he paced his stall. "Settle down, old boy," Thomas had said before leaving. "It's a big day for our girl." But as the morning progressed into afternoon, Rusty grew increasingly agitated. He whinnied loudly, calling out as he had done throughout the years whenever Olivia was late for their daily rides. When no response came, he began to push against the stall door, something he had never done before. Back at the house, the wedding party was a flurry of activity. Olivia's bridesmaids, childhood friends who had returned to Willow Creek for the occasion, surrounded her with laughter and excited chatter as they prepared to leave for the church. Daniel had spent the night in town with his best man, adhering to the tradition of not seeing the bride before the wedding. "Has anyone seen my father?" Olivia asked, suddenly realizing she hadn't seen him since breakfast. "He went to change into his suit," her mother replied, checking her watch. "He should be back any minute. The cars are ready whenever we are." Olivia nodded, but a strange feeling crept into her stomach, a mixture of wedding jitters and something else she couldn't quite place. She walked to the window, looking out toward the barn in the distance. For a moment, she considered asking if she could still make a quick trip to see Rusty, but the sight of the photographer setting up on the front lawn pushed the thought from her mind. In the barn, Rusty had managed to push his stall door open, something the old and supposedly secure latch should have prevented. With newfound freedom, he stood in the center of the barn, his ears moving back and forth as he listened to the distant sounds coming from the farmhouse. After a moment of hesitation, he slowly walked out of the barn into the bright afternoon sunlight. Thomas Jenkins was making his way back to the house from the tool shed, where he had gone to retrieve a pair of cufflinks he had left there while working the previous day. His weathered face broke into a smile as he saw Rusty emerging from the barn. "Now what are you doing out there, old friend?" he called out, changing direction to head toward the horse. But as he approached, Rusty turned away, taking a few steps in the direction of the winding dirt road that led away from the farm. "Hold on there, Rusty. Where do you think you're going?" The horse paused, looking back at Thomas as if considering his question, then continued walking with determined steps. Thomas followed, concerned about the animal wandering off on such an important day. But Rusty's pace quickened, and soon he was trotting away, leaving Thomas standing helplessly at the edge of the property. "Damn it," he muttered, considering whether to chase after the horse or return to the house where his daughter was waiting. With a heavy sigh, he turned back toward the farmhouse. Rusty had never wandered far from the property in all his years. Surely he would return soon. Back at the house, everyone was now gathered on the front lawn for photographs. Olivia smiled for the camera, surrounded by her mother and bridesmaids, but her eyes occasionally drifted toward the road, as if searching for something. "Where's Dad?" she asked again, her voice tinged with concern. "I'll go find him," her mother offered, heading back into the house. As the photographer continued directing the wedding party, a distant figure appeared on the horizon. Thomas Jenkins, walking briskly toward the house, his face flushed from exertion. "Dad, what happened?" Olivia asked as he approached. "You're not even dressed yet." Thomas hesitated, not wanting to worry his daughter. "Nothing to concern yourself with, sweetheart. Just had a small situation to handle. I'll get changed right away." He exchanged a meaningful glance with his wife, who had reappeared on the porch, silently communicating that something was amiss. Sarah nodded imperceptibly, understanding that whatever it was would have to wait until after the ceremony. "We should get going," the wedding coordinator announced, checking her watch. "The ceremony starts in 45 minutes, and we want the bride to arrive with time to spare." As the wedding party began moving toward the decorated cars waiting to transport them to the church, Olivia paused, that strange feeling returning stronger than before. She looked back at the barn once more, but from this distance she couldn't see if Rusty was in the paddock or not. "Something wrong, dear?" her mother asked, following her gaze. Olivia shook her head, pushing away the nagging feeling. "No, everything's perfect. Let's go." As the cars pulled away from the Jenkins farm, no one noticed the chestnut horse walking steadily along the tree line that paralleled the road, his destination seemingly as clear to him as it was mysterious to anyone who might have observed him. The century-old stone church of St. Matthew's stood majestically against the clear blue sky, its stained glass windows catching the afternoon sunlight in a kaleidoscope of colors. Pastor Michael Wilson, who had known Olivia since she was a child attending Sunday school, was making his final preparations for the ceremony. At 65, he had officiated hundreds of weddings, but there was always something special about uniting two people who had grown up within the tight-knit community of Willow Creek. Inside the church, floral arrangements of white roses, baby's breath, and sprigs of lavender adorned the end of each pew. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting rainbow patterns across the worn wooden floor. Daniel stood nervously at the altar with his best man, James, who had been his roommate throughout veterinary school. The groom tugged at his collar, his palms slightly damp with anticipation. "Relax," James whispered, noticing Daniel's nervousness. "In less than an hour, you'll be married to the woman of your dreams." Daniel nodded, managing a smile. "I just want everything to be perfect for her." "It will be," James assured him, patting him on the shoulder. Meanwhile, Rusty had found his way to the main road. Cars slowed as they passed the unaccompanied horse, drivers rolling down their windows to stare in confusion. Some recognized him as belonging to the Jenkins family, but none stopped, assuming someone must be nearby or that he would return to the farm on his own. The old horse maintained a steady pace, his ears forward, his eyes focused on the path ahead, as if guided by some invisible force. At the Jenkins farm, Thomas had changed into his suit in record time and was now speeding toward the church in his old pickup truck, scanning the roadside for any sign of Rusty. His worry was twofold: concern for the horse that had been part of their family for so long, and anxiety about whether he would make it to the church in time to walk his only daughter down the aisle. "Come on, Rusty, where are you?" he muttered, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. The wedding cars had already arrived at the church, and the guests were seated inside awaiting the bride's entrance. Olivia waited in a small antechamber with her bridesmaids, her stomach fluttering with butterflies. Her mother fussed around her, adjusting her veil and smoothing out invisible wrinkles in her dress. "Where's Dad?" Olivia asked, checking the time on the delicate watch that had been her grandmother's, hers something old for the wedding. "He'll be here any minute, dear," Sarah reassured her, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "You know your father wouldn't miss this for the world." One of the bridesmaids peeked out the door. "The pianist has started playing. Everyone's seated." Olivia took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. She had always imagined her wedding day would be perfect, with her father by her side and all her loved ones present. The absence of both her father and Rusty left an unexpected void. Out on the country road, Rusty had picked up his pace, now moving at a determined trot. The church was just visible in the distance, its white steeple rising above the trees. Something seemed to pull him forward, an instinct as natural to him as breathing. In all his years, he had only been to the church grounds once before, when Olivia had ridden him past it during one of their longer rides. Yet now, he moved toward it with purpose, as if he knew exactly where he was going and why. Thomas finally caught sight of Rusty about a quarter-mile ahead and accelerated, pulling alongside the horse. "Rusty, stop, boy," he called out through the open window. The horse glanced at Thomas but continued trotting undeterred. Thomas had no choice but to keep pace with him, honking occasionally in hopes that someone might help. But the road was deserted. Everyone from town already at the church for the wedding. Inside St. Matthew's, the music shifted, signaling that it was time for the ceremony to begin. The guests turned in their seats, expecting to see Olivia and her father at the entrance. Instead, the wedding coordinator appeared, whispering urgently to Pastor Wilson. Daniel's heart sank as he watched their exchange of worried glances. "Something's wrong," he whispered to James. Pastor Wilson addressed the congregation with a warm smile that masked his concern. "Dear friends and family, we're experiencing a slight delay. I invite you to enjoy the music for a few more minutes as we await the arrival of our beautiful bride." The pianist, taking the cue, continued playing, extending the prelude that was meant to be background music for seating guests. Murmurs rippled through the congregation, heads turning toward the entrance, wondering about the cause of the delay. In the antechamber, Olivia was on the verge of tears. "I can't believe he's not here," she said, her voice trembling. "Maybe we should start without him." "Just a few more minutes," her mother pleaded, peering out the window for any sign of Thomas's truck. Suddenly, Sarah gasped. "I don't believe it." "What is it?" Olivia rushed to the window, her dress rustling with the movement. There, approaching the church, was Rusty, trotting steadily with Thomas's truck crawling alongside him. The horse's mane flowed in the breeze as he made his way up the path toward the church steps. "It's Rusty," Olivia whispered, a smile breaking through her worry. "He came to my wedding." Outside, Thomas finally parked his truck and ran toward the church entrance, straightening his tie as he went. "Olivia, I'm here," he called out, knowing she must be worried sick. But his voice was drowned out by the sudden commotion as wedding guests began to notice the horse that had now reached the church steps. Rusty paused, looking up at the large wooden doors as if contemplating his next move. "Whose horse is that?" someone asked as guests began to peer out the windows and doors. "That's Rusty, Olivia's horse," replied an older woman who had known the Jenkins family for years. The wedding coordinator emerged from the church, her face a mask of disbelief as she confronted the unexpected situation. "Mr. Jenkins, what is going on? Why is there a horse at the church?" "I'm trying to figure that out myself," Thomas replied, reaching for Rusty's mane in an attempt to lead him away. "He's never done anything like this before." But Rusty sidestepped Thomas's grasp and, to everyone's astonishment, began to climb the stone steps. Each clop of his hooves on the stone seemed to echo across the churchyard, drawing more faces to the windows and doors. Inside, Olivia had left the antechamber and was now standing at the back of the church, her heart racing as she heard the commotion. The music had stopped, and all heads were turned toward the entrance. "What's happening?" Daniel called from the altar, unable to see past the crowd that had gathered at the doors. And then, as if in answer to his question, the large wooden doors swung fully open, and there stood Rusty, framed in the entrance of St. Matthew's Church, his chestnut coat gleaming in the sunlight, his dark eyes scanning the interior as the assembled guests gasped in collective shock. The horse had arrived at the wedding, and in that moment, no one could imagine what was about to happen next. A hushed silence fell over the church as Rusty stood in the doorway, his powerful presence commanding the attention of every guest. For a moment, time seemed suspended. The organist's fingers hovered motionless above the keys. The flower girl clutched her basket in stunned stillness, and even the dust particles dancing in the beams of colored light appeared to pause their eternal waltz. Thomas Jenkins rushed up behind the horse, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and confusion. "I'm so sorry," he called out to the bewildered congregation. "I don't know what's gotten into him." But Rusty wasn't finished with his grand entrance. With deliberate steps, his hooves clacking against the stone floor, the chestnut stallion began walking down the aisle. The sound echoed through the church, creating an unexpected processional that no one had rehearsed. Guests shifted in their seats, some with nervous laughter, others with genuine concern, as the horse moved past them. "Someone stop that animal," cried Mrs. Holloway, an elderly woman who had always been a bit afraid of horses. Her husband patted her hand reassuringly, though his own eyes were wide with disbelief. From the back of the church, Olivia watched the scene unfold with a mixture of emotions swirling through her heart. Embarrassment quickly gave way to wonder as she observed Rusty's determined stride. In all the years they had shared together, she had never seen him act this way. There was an almost regal quality to his movement, as if he were fulfilling some ancient duty that only he understood. At the altar, Daniel's initial shock transformed into a smile. If anyone understood the bond between Olivia and her horse, it was him. As a veterinarian, he had witnessed countless times the deep connections that formed between humans and animals. Still, this was extraordinary, even by his standards. "It's okay," Daniel called out to the wedding coordinator, who was frantically trying to decide how to handle the situation. "Let him be." Pastor Wilson stood frozen behind the pulpit, his Bible clutched tightly in his hands. In 40 years of ministry, he had seen his share of wedding day mishaps: fainting groomsmen, ring bearers who refused to walk down the aisle, even a swarm of bees that had once invaded during summer vows. But never had he encountered a horse determined to attend a ceremony. As Rusty continued his steady progress down the aisle, Sarah Jenkins made her way to her daughter's side. "Olivia," she whispered, "what should we do?" Olivia's eyes never left Rusty. I think he's looking for me," she replied softly. And indeed, the horse's ears were perked forward, his head turning slightly from side to side as if searching for someone. When he reached the halfway point of the aisle, Rusty suddenly stopped and turned his head. His dark, intelligent eyes found Olivia, and a soft whinny escaped his throat, a sound so familiar to her, the same greeting he had given her every morning since she was 13 years old. Without hesitation, Olivia stepped forward, the train of her wedding dress sweeping across the floor behind her. "Rusty," she called gently, extending her hand. The horse's response was immediate. He turned fully toward her, nickering softly, and took several steps in her direction. The guests watched in amazement as bride and horse met in the middle of the church aisle, Olivia's white dress contrasting dramatically with Rusty's chestnut coat as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "I'm sorry I didn't come see you this morning," she whispered into his ear. "I should have known you'd find a way to be here." Thomas had caught up to them by now, still trying to catch his breath. "Olivia, I'm so sorry. I tried to stop him, but he was determined to get here." Olivia smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It's okay, Dad. I think I understand." She looked up at her father, a sudden realization dawning on her face. "He's never missed any important moment in my life. Why would today be any different?" The tension in the church began to dissolve as guests witnessed the touching reunion. Even Mrs. Holloway's anxiety seemed to fade as she observed the obvious bond between the young woman and her horse. Daniel, seeing that the unusual situation was under control, made his way down from the altar to join them. "Looks like someone else wanted to give you away today," he said with a chuckle, reaching out to pat Rusty's neck. The horse acknowledged Daniel with a gentle nudge, then returned his attention to Olivia, who was still stroking his mane, her bouquet now cradled in the crook of her arm. "What do we do now?" Thomas asked, looking around at the gathered guests, the waiting pastor, and the horse that showed no signs of leaving. Pastor Wilson, who had finally recovered from his initial shock, stepped forward with unexpected calm. "Well," he said thoughtfully, "St. Francis is the patron saint of animals. Perhaps he's smiling down on us today." The pastor looked at Olivia and Daniel. It seems to me that Rusty has made it clear he wants to be part of this ceremony. Unless you object, I see no reason why he shouldn't stay." A murmur of surprise rippled through the congregation, followed by scattered applause that quickly grew into genuine approval. In a small town like Willow Creek, where many families had lived for generations and traditions ran deep, there was also room for the unexpected moments that often became the most cherished memories. Olivia looked at Daniel, her eyes questioning. This wasn't exactly the perfect wedding they had planned, but there was something undeniably perfect about it nonetheless. Daniel squeezed her hand. "I think Rusty should stay. He's important to you, which makes him important to me." The decision made, the wedding party reorganized itself. The best man and bridesmaids took their places at the altar once more, and Pastor Wilson returned to his position with a bemused smile on his face. "Well then," Thomas said, offering his arm to his daughter while keeping a firm hold on Rusty's mane with his other hand, "shall we try this again?" Olivia nodded, her heart so full she feared it might burst. The pianist, taking her cue, began the wedding march once more, the familiar notes filling the church with renewed purpose. And so, in a procession unlike any Willow Creek had ever seen, Olivia Jenkins walked down the aisle toward her future husband, escorted by both her father and her beloved horse. Rusty walked with surprising gentleness, matching his pace to theirs, his hooves falling softly on the stone floor. Guests leaned forward in their seats, phones discreetly emerging to capture the unprecedented moment, the beautiful bride in white, flanked by her father in his best suit and a chestnut horse whose presence somehow seemed completely natural despite the extraordinary circumstances. When they reached the altar, Thomas placed Olivia's hand in Daniel's, then stepped back, still holding on to Rusty. But the horse remained calm, standing like a sentinel beside Thomas as if he had practiced for this role all his life. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Wilson began, his voice steady despite the unusual wedding party before him, "we are gathered here today in the sight of God and—" He paused, a twinkle in his eye as he glanced at Rusty, "all creatures great and small, to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." A gentle ripple of laughter spread through the church, but it was warm and appreciative rather than mocking. As the ceremony continued, the presence of the horse seemed less and less extraordinary. After all, wasn't love itself a miraculous, unpredictable force? Perhaps it was fitting that such an unexpected guest would bear witness to the union of two hearts. As Pastor Wilson continued with the ceremony, the initial shock of Rusty's presence gradually gave way to a sense of serendipity. The horse stood quietly beside Thomas, occasionally shifting his weight from one leg to another, but otherwise remaining remarkably composed. Every few minutes, he would turn his head slightly to look at Olivia, as if reassuring himself that she was still there, still radiant in her wedding dress, her hands joined with Daniel's as they exchanged their vows. "I, Olivia Elizabeth Jenkins, take you, Daniel James Cooper, to be my lawfully wedded husband," she spoke, her voice clear and steady despite the unusual circumstances. Her eyes flickered briefly toward Rusty before returning to Daniel's face. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer." As Olivia recited the traditional words, Mrs. Reynolds, who had taught piano to half the town's children over the past 40 years, leaned toward her neighbor and whispered, "You know, they say animals can sense things we can't. My grandmother used to tell me that horses especially have a gift for knowing when something important is about to happen." Her neighbor nodded thoughtfully, watching as Rusty's ears twitched at every change in Olivia's voice. "My father said the same about dogs. Had an old hound that howled all night before the flood of '85 hit. Nobody believed him until the water came." Similar whispered conversations rippled through the congregation as the ceremony progressed. Something about the horse's solemnity, his almost purposeful presence, stirred memories of old tales, half-forgotten superstitions and family stories passed down through generations about the mysterious connections between animals and significant life events. For his part, Daniel was taking the situation with remarkable poise. As a veterinarian, he had developed a deep respect for the intelligence and emotional lives of animals. During his vows, he even glanced at Rusty and added an impromptu line. "And I promise to honor all the beings you love, because they are part of what makes you who you are." Olivia squeezed his hands gratefully, the gesture conveying what words could not. How much it meant that he understood this unconventional but profound bond. When it came time for the rings, James stepped forward, reaching into his pocket with a slightly nervous glance at the horse. The gold bands gleamed in the colored light streaming through the stained glass windows as Pastor Wilson blessed them. "These rings are a symbol of the unbroken circle of love," the pastor intoned, "love freely given, with no beginning and no end." As Daniel slid the ring onto Olivia's finger, Rusty suddenly became more alert. His ears pricked forward, and a soft nicker escaped him, drawing nervous chuckles from the congregation. Thomas tightened his grip on the horse's mane, prepared to lead him outside if necessary, but Rusty remained in place, his dark eyes fixed on the exchanging of rings with an intensity that was almost human. "Is he all right?" Pastor Wilson whispered, pausing briefly in the ceremony. Thomas nodded, though there was uncertainty in his expression. In all the years they had owned Rusty, he had never seen the horse behave quite this way. It was as if he was witnessing something beyond the visible ritual, something that only he could perceive. The ceremony continued, and Pastor Wilson guided them through the final prayers and blessings. "What God has joined together, let no one put asunder," he proclaimed, his voice echoing in the stillness of the church. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Daniel, you may kiss your bride." As Daniel leaned in to kiss Olivia, a shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds outside, sending a particularly brilliant beam of rainbow light through the stained glass window, depicting Noah's Ark. The colorful ray fell directly on the couple, and by extension, on Rusty, who stood barely 3 feet away. For a brief, magical moment, bride, groom, and horse were bathed in the same kaleidoscope of colors. "Oh my," whispered Sarah from her seat in the front row, her hand flying to her heart. Several others in the congregation gasped softly at the timing of the light, which seemed too perfect to be coincidental. The kiss ended, and Daniel and Olivia turned to face their friends and family, their faces flushed with happiness. Pastor Wilson raised his hand in blessing. "It is my great joy to present to you for the first time Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Cooper." The congregation erupted in applause, rising to their feet in celebration. Rusty, startled by the sudden noise, took a step backward, but did not bolt. Instead, after the initial surprise, he moved closer to Olivia, as if drawn to her joy. As the traditional recessional music began, the couple prepared to walk back down the aisle. Olivia looked at Rusty, then at her father, a question in her eyes. "Go on," Thomas said with a smile, still holding on to the horse. "We'll follow you out." But when Daniel and Olivia began to walk, Rusty became agitated, pulling against Thomas's hold, his hooves dancing nervously on the stone floor. It was clear he had no intention of being left behind. "I think he wants to go with us," Olivia said, pausing to stroke Rusty's nose. "Well, he's come this far," Daniel conceded with a laugh. "Might as well complete the journey." And so, to the continued amazement of their guests, the newlyweds processed down the aisle with Rusty walking beside them, creating a wedding recessional that would be talked about in Willow Creek for generations to come. The photographer, who had already taken more photos than at any wedding in his career, continued to capture every incredible moment. Outside the church, the warm spring air greeted them, carrying the scent of apple blossoms from the nearby orchard. The wedding party assembled on the steps for photographs, and Rusty, to everyone's surprise, positioned himself perfectly beside Olivia without being directed, as if he understood exactly what was expected of him. "I've never seen anything like it," the photographer said, shaking his head in wonder as he adjusted his camera. "These are going to be the most unique wedding photos I've ever taken." As guests filtered out of the church, gathering in small groups to discuss the extraordinary event they had just witnessed, Daniel pulled Olivia aside for a moment of privacy behind one of the large oak trees that dotted the churchyard. "Are you disappointed?" he asked softly, his thumb gently caressing the new ring on her finger. "I know this isn't exactly the perfect wedding you dreamed of." Olivia looked past him to where Rusty stood patiently among their friends and family, accepting pats and attention from guests who had quickly adapted to his presence. Then she gazed back at her new husband, her eyes shining with unshed tears of happiness. "It wasn't the wedding I imagined," she admitted. "It was better, more real, more us." She reached up to touch his face tenderly. "Rusty has been with me through every important moment of my life. It seems right that he should be here for this one too." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I suppose we should have included him on the guest list to begin with." Olivia laughed, the sound pure and joyful. "Next time we'll know better." They rejoined the celebrations, making their way toward the receiving line that had formed spontaneously near the church steps. But as they approached, Thomas came toward them with a puzzled expression on his face. "Something strange is happening with Rusty," he said quietly, casting a glance back at the horse. "He won't let anyone near the gift table." Indeed, Rusty had positioned himself beside the table where guests had been placing their wrapped presents, and he seemed to be standing guard, gently but firmly nudging away anyone who approached. His ears were forward, his posture alert but not aggressive, as if he was waiting for something, or someone. Olivia and Daniel exchanged puzzled glances before following Thomas to the gift table. The white linen-covered table was adorned with a simple floral arrangement matching Olivia's bouquet, surrounded by presents of various sizes, wrapped in elegant paper, and adorned with ribbons and bows. Rusty stood beside it, his posture alert, yet strangely calm, as if he had appointed himself guardian of some precious treasure. "He's been like this for the past 10 minutes, Thomas explained, scratching his head in confusion. "Mrs. Finch tried to add her gift to the pile, and he nearly knocked it out of her hands." Olivia approached Rusty cautiously, her wedding dress rustling softly against the grass. "What is it, boy? What's wrong?" The horse's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, and he turned his head toward her with an intensity that was almost unnerving. Then, to everyone's surprise, he lowered his head and gently nudged a particular gift on the table, a small package wrapped in simple brown paper and tied with twine, lacking the elaborate presentation of the other gifts. "I don't recognize that one," Sarah said, joining them with a look of concern on her face. "It wasn't on the registry list I've been keeping." Daniel stepped closer, his veterinarian's instincts kicking in as he observed Rusty's behavior. "He seems fixated on it. I've seen animals develop unusual attachments to objects before, but this is different. It's almost like he's trying to tell us something." The wedding coordinator, who had been directing guests toward the reception area, hurried over. "Is everything all right? We need to start moving people to the reception hall soon." "Just give us a minute," Olivia requested, her attention still focused on Rusty and the mysterious gift. She reached out toward the package, but before her fingers could touch it, Rusty nickered softly and pushed his nose against her hand as if urging her to take it. "I think he wants you to open it now," Thomas suggested, his voice low with bewilderment. Olivia glanced at Daniel, who nodded encouragingly. With careful movements, she picked up the small package. It was surprisingly light, and something inside shifted slightly as she held it. There was no card attached, no indication of who might have left it. "Should you open it?" Sarah whispered, her motherly concern evident. "We don't know who it's from." But Rusty's behavior was too strange to ignore. Taking a deep breath, Olivia untied the twine and carefully removed the brown paper. Inside was a worn wooden box, its surface smooth from years of handling, with a simple brass clasp keeping it closed. The wood had darkened with age, giving it an antique appearance that spoke of history and secrets. "I've never seen this before," Olivia murmured, running her fingers over the polished surface. Rusty watched her intently, his dark eyes never leaving the box. When Olivia hesitated to open it, he nudged her hand again, more insistently this time. "I think you'd better see what's inside," Daniel said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. With trembling fingers, Olivia lifted the small brass latch and slowly opened the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded blue velvet, lay a silver locket on a delicate chain. The locket was oval-shaped, intricately engraved with flowing patterns that encircled a single letter. J for Jenkins. "That's beautiful," Sarah gasped, leaning closer. "But I don't recognize it. It's not a family piece I know of." Olivia lifted the locket from its velvet nest, the silver catching the sunlight as it dangled from her fingers. "There's something engraved on the back," she noted, turning it over. In small, flowing script were the words, "Love endures across time and space." "Open it," Thomas encouraged, his curiosity evident in his voice. Olivia carefully pried open the locket's clasp. Inside were 2 miniature photographs, yellowed with age. On the left was a sepia image of a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to Olivia. The same high cheekbones, the same curve of the lips, the same determined set of the jaw. Her hair was styled in the fashion of the early 1900s, but her eyes seemed to transcend time, gazing out from the photograph with familiar intensity. On the right side was a photograph of a horse, a chestnut stallion with a distinctive white blaze down his face, standing proudly beside the young woman. "She looks just like you," Daniel whispered, peering over Olivia's shoulder at the locket. "And that horse." Thomas's voice trailed off as he glanced from the photograph to Rusty, who was now standing calmly, his eyes soft as he watched Olivia hold the locket. "The resemblance is uncanny," Sarah agreed, her voice barely audible. "But who is she? And how did this get here?" Olivia stared at the photographs, a strange feeling washing over her, a sense of recognition that defied explanation. She had never seen this woman before, yet something about her felt deeply familiar, as if she were looking at a reflection of herself from another time. "There's something tucked behind the photos," Daniel pointed out, noticing a corner of yellowed paper peeking out from behind the images. With utmost care, Olivia extracted a tiny folded note from behind the photograph of the young woman. The paper was brittle with age, and she held her breath as she unfolded it, afraid it might crumble between her fingers. The handwriting was delicate yet determined, the ink faded to a pale brown. "To my descendant on her wedding day. When he returns to you, know that our love story continues. Eleanor Jenkins, 1912. Olivia read the words aloud, her voice growing softer with each word, as the implications began to sink in. The guests who had gathered around them fell silent, the only sound the gentle breeze rustling through the oak trees surrounding the churchyard. "When who returns?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. As if in answer, Rusty stepped forward and gently pressed his nose against the locket in Olivia's hand. The gesture was so deliberate, so tender, that it sent a chill down her spine. "It can't be," Sarah whispered, her eyes widening as she looked from the locket to Rusty and back again. "That's not possible." But Thomas was nodding slowly, a memory surfacing from long ago. "My grandmother used to tell stories about her mother, Eleanor, my great-grandmother. She lost her fiancé in a hunting accident just days before their wedding. The story goes that she never married, but found comfort in raising horses, especially one special stallion she called Spirit. Spirit, Olivia repeated, the name feeling right somehow as she looked at Rusty. The horse's ears pricked forward at the word, as if responding to a long-forgotten name. There was something else in the story, Thomas continued, his brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to recall details from childhood tales. Something about a promise that Eleanor made as she lay dying, that she would find happiness in another life, that true love would find a way to return to her. The wedding guests stood in stunned silence, the implications of what they were witnessing slowly dawning on them. Even those who might normally scoff at such fantastical notions found themselves unable to dismiss the strange confluence of events. The horse's determined journey to the church, his careful vigilance over the mysterious gift, and now this revelation about a love story from over a century ago. Olivia looked into Rusty's deep brown eyes, seeing them now with new understanding. Was it possible? Could the soul of Eleanor's lost love somehow have found its way back, lifetime after lifetime, to fulfill a promise made long ago? Had Rusty been drawn to her from the first moment not just as a beloved pet, but as a soul companion completing a journey across time? "This is crazy," she whispered, yet even as the words left her lips, a deeper part of her recognized a truth that transcended rational explanation. She glanced at Daniel, suddenly worried about his reaction to this bizarre turn of events on what should have been a straightforward, joyful day. But to Olivia's surprise, Daniel's expression held no disbelief or judgment, only wonder and a gentle curiosity that was so characteristic of him. As a man of science who spent his days healing animals, he had often told her about moments in his practice that defied explanation, instances where he had witnessed connections between animals and humans that went beyond what modern understanding could explain. "If anyone had told me this morning that our wedding would involve a possible case of reincarnation," he said with a small smile, "I probably would have suggested they cut back on the champagne." He took Olivia's free hand in his. "But after everything we've seen today, I don't know, Liv. There are more things in heaven and earth, right?" Olivia squeezed his hand gratefully, relief washing over her. Of course Daniel would understand. His open heart was one of the reasons she had fallen in love with him in the first place. The wedding guests had formed a circle around them, their faces a mixture of disbelief, wonder, and in some cases, deep emotion. Mrs. Holloway, who had been so frightened of Rusty earlier, now gazed at the horse with newfound respect, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "I remember my grandmother talking about Eleanor Jenkins," she said softly. "They said she had a way with horses like nobody else in these parts. Could calm the wildest stallion with just a touch and a whispered word." "My grandfather mentioned her too," added Mr. Peterson, the town's oldest resident at 93. "Said her fiancé was a young man named Michael Williams. Came from the next county over. Fine horseman by all accounts. Died in a terrible accident just 3 days before their wedding." Thomas nodded, the pieces of family history beginning to fall into place. "That's right. The story was that he was thrown from his horse while checking fences on the north boundary, broke his neck and died instantly. Eleanor never married," Mrs. Holloway continued, her voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller sharing a beloved tale. "Devoted herself to her horses and the farm, but they say she never lost her faith that true love would find a way back to her. On her deathbed, she made my grandmother promise to keep watch for signs." Olivia looked down at the locket in her palm, its silver surface warm now from her touch, then back at Rusty, who stood watching her with what could only be described as devotion. "But how did this get here today? Who could have known to bring it?" As if on cue, a soft voice spoke from the edge of the circle. "I did." The crowd parted to reveal Mrs. Winters, the town librarian and local historian, a woman in her late 70s with silver hair and kind eyes that had witnessed decades of Willow Creek's history. She stepped forward with the aid of a carved wooden cane, her movements deliberate but steady. Eleanor Jenkins entrusted this locket to my grandmother, who passed it to my mother, who passed it to me, she explained. Along with instructions that have been followed for 3 generations, it was to be given to the first Jenkins bride who had formed a soul bond with a chestnut horse. "But how did you know it was me?" Olivia asked, clutching the locket tighter. Mrs. Winters smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. "I've watched you grow up, Olivia, seen you with Rusty all these years. The way you two connected from the very first day. It was exactly as the stories described Eleanor in spirit. When I heard Thomas had given you a chestnut colt for your 13th birthday, I started paying attention. By the time you were 16, I was certain. But why wait until today to give it to me?" Olivia asked. "The instructions were very specific," Mrs. Winters replied. "The locket was to be presented on the wedding day, not before. Eleanor believed that the circle would close when her descendant found both human love and the returned soul of her lost fiancé." She nodded toward Daniel, then Rusty. "You've found both." The wedding coordinator, who had been standing back in stunned silence like everyone else, finally stepped forward with an apologetic cough. "I hate to interrupt such a remarkable moment," she said, "but the reception hall is ready, and the caterers are concerned about the food timing." Olivia nodded, suddenly remembering that this was, after all, still her wedding day. The revelation about Rusty had momentarily eclipsed everything else, but there were still celebrations to be had, traditions to honor. "Of course," she said, carefully securing the locket around her neck. The silver pendant rested just above her heart, its weight both unfamiliar and somehow right. "We should continue with the reception." As if sensing the shift in attention, Rusty stepped back from the gift table, no longer guarding it now that his mission was accomplished. He seemed content, his earlier agitation replaced with a calm presence that somehow felt more human than animal. "What about Rusty?" Thomas asked, looking at his daughter questioningly. "Should I take him back to the farm now?" Olivia glanced at Daniel, who smiled and shrugged. "It's your call, but after coming this far, he might as well join the reception too. The venue has that large garden area, he could stay there." The wedding coordinator looked as though she might faint at this suggestion, but Olivia's face lit up with a smile that brooked no argument. "That's perfect. After all, he's practically family." And so, in a procession that continued to defy convention, the wedding party made its way toward the reception venue a short distance from the church. The bride and groom led the way in their decorated car, followed by the wedding party in their vehicles, and behind them, to the continued amazement of onlookers, Thomas Jenkins walking beside Rusty, who seemed quite content to be part of the wedding parade. At the Willow Creek Community Hall, transformed for the occasion with twinkling lights, floral arrangements, and white drapery, the caterers and serving staff stared open-mouthed as Rusty was led into the garden area adjacent to the main hall. "He'll need water," Olivia instructed, carefully arranging her dress as she knelt to remove a few burrs from Rusty's forelock. "And maybe some apples or carrots if the kitchen can spare them." As guests began to arrive at the reception, the story of Rusty's mysterious appearance at the church and the even more mysterious locket had spread like wildfire. Small groups gathered in the garden to catch a glimpse of the horse, now comfortably settled on the lush grass, occasionally lifting his head to watch the proceedings with intelligent eyes. Inside the hall, as Olivia and Daniel prepared for their entrance as husband and wife, she took a moment to touch the locket that now hung around her neck. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked gently, noting her thoughtful expression. Olivia nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of emotions. I'm just trying to process it all. It's like discovering a part of myself I never knew existed. She looked up at him. Does it bother you? The idea that Rusty might be something more than just a horse? Daniel considered this for a moment. You know, as a vet, I've always believed animals have depths we barely understand. Souls, consciousness, emotional lives far more complex than we give them credit for. He smiled, squeezing her hand. If Rusty has carried the soul of someone who loved your ancestor across time to be here for you, that doesn't diminish what we have. It adds another layer to it, another kind of love supporting ours. Olivia rose on tiptoe to kiss him, her heart overflowing with gratitude for this man who could accept the inexplicable with such grace. Ladies and gentlemen, the DJ announced through the speakers, please join me in welcoming, for the first time as husband and wife, Mr. and Mrs. Daniel and Olivia Cooper. The reception hall erupted in applause as Olivia and Daniel entered hand in hand, beaming with happiness. The hall had been transformed with twinkling string lights, greenery, and white roses that created an atmosphere of enchanted elegance. Crystal glasses caught the light from overhead chandeliers, and the wedding cake, 3 tiers of white fondant adorned with delicate sugar flowers, stood proudly on a table near the dance floor. As they made their way to the head table, Olivia noticed that many guests were wearing their table napkins folded in their laps, but had left their seats to gather at the large windows and French doors that overlooked the garden where Rusty was contentedly grazing. Even now, in the midst of the reception, he was drawing attention, a living bridge between past and present, between the ordinary and the extraordinary. It seems your other escort is still the center of attention, Daniel whispered with a smile as they took their seats. Olivia laughed softly, touching the locket that now rested against her collarbone. I think we're going to have to get used to sharing the spotlight today. The meal progressed with the usual wedding traditions, toasts from the best man and maid of honor, the clinking of glasses to prompt the newlyweds to kiss, the quiet murmur of conversation and occasional laughter from the guests. But there was an undercurrent of something different, something magical that hadn't been present at other Willow Creek weddings. Guests kept glancing toward the garden, and the story of Rusty and the locket had become the main topic of conversation at every table. After the main course had been served, Mrs. Winters made her way to Olivia and Daniel's table, moving slowly but deliberately with her wooden cane. In her free hand, she carried an aged leather-bound book. I thought you might want to see this, she said, carefully placing the book on the table in front of Olivia. It's Eleanor's journal. She began writing it after Michael's death and continued until her own passing in 1958. Olivia looked at the journal with wide eyes, hesitant to touch it as if it might dissolve beneath her fingers. You've had this all this time? Mrs. Winters nodded, settling into an empty chair beside Olivia. Like the locket, it's been passed down through the generations. I've been its caretaker for the last 30 years. With careful movements, Olivia opened the journal to a page marked with a faded silk ribbon. The handwriting matched that of the note in the locket, delicate yet determined, a tangible connection to a woman who had lived nearly a century ago, but whose blood ran in Olivia's veins. October 15th, 1912. Olivia read aloud softly, her voice barely audible above the ambient sounds of the reception. Spirit came to me again in my dreams last night, not as the horse he has become, but as Michael, just as he was before the accident. He told me not to grieve, that souls who are meant to be together will always find their way back to each other, though the journey might take many lifetimes. I awoke with tears on my face, but hope in my heart. I believe him. I must believe him. And so I will wait. And my children's children's children will wait, until the circle is complete. Olivia looked up from the journal, her eyes glistening with tears. She never gave up hope. Never, Mrs. Winters confirmed with a gentle smile. And there's more. Read the entry from April 3rd, 1913. Olivia carefully turned the pages until she found the date, then began to read again. Spirit did something remarkable today. I had taken the locket out to polish it. Michael's birthday would have been tomorrow, and had left it on the table while I went to fetch more polish. When I returned, Spirit had somehow opened the back door, which I know I had latched, and was standing beside the table, his nose touching the locket. When he saw me, he looked at me with such intelligence, such awareness, that for a moment I saw Michael looking back at me from those dark eyes. I know now without doubt that a fragment of Michael's soul lives on in Spirit, and I am not alone after all. A reverent silence fell over those closest to the table who had been listening to Olivia read. Even the skeptics among them could not deny the goosebumps that rose on their arms as they glanced toward the garden where Rusty still stood, occasionally looking toward the hall as if keeping watch over the proceedings. "There's one more entry you should read," Mrs. Winters said, her voice soft with emotion. "The last one Eleanor ever wrote, just days before she passed." She turned to the final pages of the journal with practiced ease, pointing to an entry where the handwriting was noticeably shakier, the letters formed by a hand weakened with age and illness. December 18th, 1958. I am not long for this world now, and I find myself thinking of the great mystery that awaits us all. But I am not afraid. Michael has been waiting for me all these years, and soon we will be reunited beyond the veil. But before I go, I must record one last vision that came to me in the space between waking and sleeping. I saw a girl with my eyes and my smile, standing in a white dress beside a man with kind hands and a gentle heart. And nearby stood a chestnut horse with Michael's soul shining through its eyes. The circle will be complete when these three come together, and the love that was interrupted in one lifetime will find its proper conclusion in another. The locket will find its way to her when the time is right. Olivia's voice faltered on the last words, and she raised her eyes to meet Daniel's. The coincidence was too precise, the description too accurate to be dismissed. "She saw us," Daniel whispered, wonder evident in his voice. "All of us, together." "Not a coincidence at all, then," Olivia said softly, touching the locket again. "Destiny." The word hung in the air between them, laden with meaning and possibility. Around them, the reception continued, servers clearing plates, the DJ preparing for the first dance, guests mingling and celebrating. But in that moment, Olivia and Daniel existed in a bubble of quiet revelation, contemplating the extraordinary tapestry of connections that had brought them to this day. A loud whinny from the garden broke the spell. Olivia turned to see Rusty at the edge of the garden, as close to the reception hall as he could get without entering, his head high and ears pricked forward. It was nearly time for the first dance. "I think he's reminding us we have a reception to attend to," Daniel said with a gentle laugh, rising from his seat and offering his hand to Olivia. "Shall we?" As they made their way to the dance floor, Mrs. Winters tucked the journal carefully into her bag. "I'll leave this with you before the end of the night," she promised. "It belongs to you now, as does the locket. The circle is complete." The DJ's voice came over the speakers again. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the couple's first dance as husband and wife." Daniel and Olivia moved to the center of the dance floor as the opening notes of their chosen song began to play. As they swayed together to the music, Olivia was acutely aware of Rusty watching from the garden, his presence like a blessing from another time. As Olivia and Daniel finished their first dance to enthusiastic applause, the DJ announced it was time for the father-daughter dance. Thomas Jenkins made his way onto the dance floor, his weathered face a mixture of pride and emotion as he took his daughter's hand. "You look beautiful, Liv," he said softly, as they began to sway to the gentle melody. "Your mother and I couldn't be prouder." Olivia smiled, blinking back tears. "Thanks, Dad, for everything." As they danced, Olivia noticed that Rusty had moved even closer to the French doors, his attention entirely focused on her. His ears were pricked forward, and his dark eyes followed her movements with unwavering attention. "Rusty seems very interested in our dance," Thomas remarked, glancing over his shoulder at the horse. "He's been watching everything," Olivia said. "It's like he understands exactly what's happening. After what we've learned today, I wouldn't be surprised if he does." Thomas's voice had taken on a thoughtful quality. "You know, when you were little, I used to tell you stories about your great-great-grandmother Eleanor and her special way with horses. I never imagined they might be more than just family legends." The song continued, and as they moved across the floor, Olivia noticed something strange beginning to happen. Rusty had started to move in the garden, his steps deliberate and measured, almost as if he was mimicking the dance. He would take several steps to the right, then to the left, then turn in a small circle, movements no horse would naturally make. "Dad, look at Rusty," Olivia whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Thomas turned, his eyes widening as he watched the horse's unusual behavior. "I've never seen anything like it," he murmured. "It's almost as if he's dancing too," Olivia finished for him. The guests had begun to notice as well. Conversations halted mid-sentence as heads turned toward the garden. Some pulled out their phones to record the extraordinary sight, while others simply stared in astonishment. "He's dancing with you," Mrs. Winters called from her seat, her eyes bright with emotion, "just as Michael would have wanted to dance with Eleanor at their wedding." As the song reached its final notes, Rusty stopped his movements and stood perfectly still, his gaze never leaving Olivia. The timing was so precise that it could not have been coincidental. He had somehow understood the duration of the dance and had participated in his own way, bridging the gap between past and present, between human celebration and equine understanding. When the music ended, the reception hall erupted in applause, not just for Olivia and her father, but for Rusty as well. The horse seemed to accept the acknowledgement with dignified grace, lowering his head slightly as if in a bow. As other couples began to fill the dance floor for the next song, Olivia made her way to the French doors, stepping outside into the garden where Rusty waited. The evening air was warm and scented with roses, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the landscape. "That was incredible," she said softly, stroking Rusty's neck. "You were dancing with us, weren't you?" The horse nickered gently, leaning into her touch in a way that felt more human than animal. Olivia rested her forehead against his, closing her eyes and feeling a deep connection that transcended ordinary understanding. "I always knew you were special," she whispered, "from the very first day Dad brought you home, but I never imagined." "Quite a remarkable animal, isn't he?" said a voice behind her. Olivia turned to find Dr. Lawrence, the retired local physician who had delivered her at birth and had cared for 3 generations of Willow Creek residents. At 87, he moved slowly, but his mind remained sharp, his eyes bright with intelligence behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Dr. Lawrence, I didn't know you were here," Olivia said, smiling warmly at the elderly man who had been part of every significant event in her life from her first steps to her high school graduation. "Wouldn't have missed it for the world," he replied, his gaze shifting to Rusty, "especially now that I've seen this fellow in action." He approached the horse carefully, extending a gnarled hand. Rusty sniffed it politely before allowing the doctor to pat his nose. "You know, I was just a young medical student when Eleanor Jenkins was in her final days. I assisted the town doctor who cared for her." Olivia's eyes widened in surprise. "You knew Eleanor?" Dr. Lawrence nodded. a faraway look entering his eyes as memories from over 60 years ago resurfaced. I was there when she spoke her final words. The older doctor thought she was delirious, but I've never forgotten what she said. He looked directly at Olivia, his voice taking on a reverent quality. The circle remains unbroken. Love finds a way back. Watch for the horse at the wedding. Those were her exact words. A chill ran down Olivia's spine despite the warmth of the evening. "And you never told anyone?" "Who would have believed me?" Dr. Lawrence said with a small smile. "A dying woman's prophecy about a horse at a wedding decades in the future. I filed it away as one of life's mysteries. But when I saw this fellow walk into the church today..." He shook his head in wonder. "Some things defy scientific explanation, my dear. Some connections run deeper than we can understand." As if to emphasize the doctor's words, Rusty gently nudged Olivia's hand where it rested against her dress, his nose finding the exact spot where the locket lay beneath the fabric. The gesture was so precise, so deliberate that Olivia caught her breath. "He knows," she whispered. "Doctor?" Lawrence nodded, watching the interaction with fascination. "Indeed he does. And now so do you." Inside the reception hall, the celebration continued in full swing. Daniel had noticed Olivia's absence and came to the French doors, his face lighting up when he saw her in the garden with Rusty and Dr. Lawrence. "Everything okay out here?" he asked, stepping into the garden to join them. "Better than okay," Olivia replied, reaching for his hand. "Dr. Lawrence was just telling me that he was present when Eleanor died. He heard her final prophecy about Rusty coming to our wedding." Daniel's eyebrows rose in surprise as he turned to the elderly doctor. "Seriously? You've known about this all along?" "Known, but not understood," Dr. Lawrence clarified. "Some puzzles take a lifetime to solve." He looked between Olivia, Daniel, and Rusty with a thoughtful expression. "I believe Eleanor would be at peace now. Seeing the three of you together, the story has come full circle." As twilight deepened into evening, more guests drifted into the garden, drawn by the unusual gathering. They formed a semicircle around Olivia, Daniel, and Rusty, listening intently as Dr. Lawrence recounted his experience with Eleanor. Some nodded in solemn understanding, while others exchanged skeptical glances, struggling to reconcile the supernatural implications with their modern worldview. "So you're saying that horse is the reincarnation of a man who died over 100 years ago?" Mr. Thompson, the high school science teacher, asked with barely concealed doubt. "That's a bit far-fetched, don't you think?" Before Dr. Lawrence could respond, Rusty did something that silenced even the most skeptical observers. He walked purposefully to the edge of the garden where a wild rose bush grew, carefully took a stem with a single bloom between his teeth, and brought it back to present to Olivia with a gesture that was impossibly gentle and refined for a horse. "My God, Mrs. Winters gasped, her hand flying to her heart. Eleanor wrote about this in her journal. Michael gave her a single rose before every date they had. It was their tradition." Olivia accepted the rose with trembling fingers, looking into Rusty's eyes with newfound understanding. In their dark depths, she saw something, or someone, looking back at her with an intelligence and awareness that transcended his equine form. The rose presentation had rendered even the most vocal skeptics silent. Mr. Thompson, the science teacher who had questioned the reincarnation theory moments before, now stood with his mouth slightly agape, his worldview visibly shaken. The garden had become a place of reverence, the wedding reception inside momentarily forgotten as guests witnessed something that defied rational explanation. Daniel placed his arm around Olivia's waist, drawing her close as she cradled the rose Rusty had given her. "I think," he said quietly, "that we're all experiencing something most people only read about in books or see in movies." Olivia nodded, her gaze still locked with Rusty's. It's like a veil has been lifted just for today, like we're seeing beyond the ordinary world. The evening had deepened, stars beginning to appear in the velvet sky above Willow Creek. Inside, the DJ announced that it was time for the cake cutting, his voice carrying out to the garden where much of the wedding party had gathered. The reminder of wedding traditions waiting to be honored seemed to break the spell, and guests began to drift back into the reception hall, though many cast lingering glances at Rusty as they went. "We should go back in," Daniel suggested gently. "Our cake is waiting." Olivia hesitated, looking at Rusty with concern. "I don't want to leave him out here alone, not after everything that's happened." Mrs. Winters, who had remained in the garden, stepped forward with a thoughtful expression. In Eleanor's journal, there's a passage about a special ritual she performed on the anniversary of what would have been her wedding day. Each year, she lit a candle and placed it in the window of her bedroom, a symbol of the light that guides souls back to one another. She turned toward the reception hall, where centerpieces with candles adorned each table. "Perhaps we could bring a candle out here for Rusty, a physical representation of the bond that has persisted across time." Daniel smiled at the suggestion. "I think that's a wonderful idea, a way to honor both the past and the present." One of the waitstaff was dispatched to bring a candle, and soon Mrs. Winters was carefully placing it on a small stone bench near where Rusty stood. As the flame flickered to life, Rusty's attention was immediately drawn to it. He approached slowly, lowering his head to gaze at the dancing light. "Now he won't be alone," Mrs. Winters said softly. "Light has a way of keeping souls company." Reassured, Olivia and Daniel returned to the reception hall for the cake cutting, though Olivia positioned herself so she could still see Rusty through the windows. The horse remained near the candle, occasionally looking toward the hall as if keeping watch over the proceedings. After they had cut the cake and fed each other the first bites, Daniel being extra careful not to get frosting on Olivia's dress, they mingled with their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes. Yet throughout these interactions, Olivia found her attention continually drawn back to the garden, to Rusty standing sentinel by the flickering flame. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked during a quiet moment, noticing her distraction. "I'm just..." Olivia hesitated, searching for the right words. "I feel like today has changed everything. Not just because we're married, but because of what we've discovered about Rusty, about Eleanor and Michael. It's as if my understanding of the world has expanded in ways I never thought possible." Daniel nodded, his eyes reflecting the same wonder she felt. "I know what you mean. As a vet, I've always believed animals have depths we barely comprehend, but this goes beyond anything I could have imagined." He squeezed her hand. "Whatever happens next, we're in it together." As the reception continued into the night, the dance floor filled with energetic guests, while others gathered in small groups, still discussing the day's extraordinary events. The story of Rusty and the locket had spread throughout the town, and many who hadn't been at the church had heard second-hand accounts from those who witnessed his entrance. Around 10 o'clock, as the celebration was in full swing, Thomas Jenkins approached his daughter with an unexpected announcement. "Liv, you need to see this," he said, his voice betraying his astonishment. "There's something happening with Rusty." Olivia and Daniel followed him to the French doors, where a small crowd had already gathered, their faces illuminated by an unusual glow coming from the garden. What they saw left them speechless. The candle that had been placed on the stone bench was now surrounded by a halo of soft, golden light that seemed to emanate from the flame itself, extending outward in gentle waves. And at the center of this phenomenon stood Rusty, bathed in the supernatural radiance, his chestnut coat gleaming as if lit from within. "What is that?" someone whispered, the question hanging in the air unanswered. Rusty stood perfectly still within the circle of light, his eyes reflecting the golden glow. There was something different about his posture now, a dignified, almost human quality to the way he held himself, as if momentarily transcending his equine form. Beside Olivia, Mrs. Winters gasped softly. It's exactly as Eleanor described in her journal, the light that connects souls across the veil. Unable to resist the pull of the mysterious spectacle, Olivia stepped into the garden, Daniel close behind her. As they approached, the golden light seemed to intensify, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Rusty watched them come, his gaze unwavering. "It's not just light," Dr. Lawrence murmured from the doorway, his scientific mind struggling to categorize what he was witnessing. It's almost as if the barrier between worlds has thinned. When Olivia reached Rusty, she instinctively touched the locket at her throat. As her fingers made contact with the silver pendant, something extraordinary happened. The light surrounding Rusty seemed to shift and coalesce, forming a shimmering silhouette beside him, the indistinct outline of a man in early 20th century attire. Gasps and exclamations rippled through the onlookers as the apparition became more defined. Though still translucent, the features were clear enough to reveal a handsome young man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He stood with one hand resting on Rusty's neck, the other extended slightly toward Olivia, as if in greeting or blessing. "Michael," Olivia whispered, knowing somehow that she was looking at the spirit of Eleanor's lost fiancé. The figure inclined his head in acknowledgement, his smile deepening. Though no words were spoken, a profound sense of gratitude and peace emanated from the apparition, washing over everyone present like a gentle wave. Daniel, standing beside his bride, felt no fear in the face of this supernatural manifestation, only wonder and a deep understanding. He took Olivia's hand in his, and together they faced the spirit of a love that had waited a century to find its resolution. For several heartbeats, time seemed suspended as present and past communed in silent acknowledgement. Then slowly, the figure began to fade, the golden light receding back toward the candle flame. As the apparition disappeared, Rusty lowered his head and nudged the locket on Olivia's chest one final time. In that touch was a message that needed no words. The circle was complete. The waiting was over. Love, in its many forms across time, had found its way home. As the apparition faded completely, a profound silence fell over the garden. The candle flickered, now just an ordinary flame once more, and Rusty stood quietly beside it, his eyes still holding that impossible intelligence but the supernatural glow gone from his chestnut coat. For several long moments no one spoke, each person present attempting to process what they had witnessed, a glimpse beyond the veil, a confirmation that love could indeed transcend time and even death itself. Finally, Mrs. Winters broke the silence, her voice wavering with emotion. "Eleanor wrote that on her deathbed. She had a vision of Michael reaching out to her across time, promising they would be reunited. I always thought it was the comfort of a dying woman's imagination." She wiped a tear from her wrinkled cheek. "I never dreamed I would live to see the proof of it with my own eyes." Olivia stood with one hand still on her locket, the other clasped tightly in Daniel's. "I don't think anyone will ever look at Rusty the same way again," she said softly. "Or me, for that matter." Daniel squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Does that bother you?" She considered the question for a moment, looking from Rusty to the assembled guests, their faces still reflecting awe and wonder. "No," she decided. "It feels right somehow, like we were meant to be part of something larger than ourselves." As if breaking from a collective trance, people began to move and speak again, their voices hushed at first, then gradually returning to normal volume. Some returned to the reception, eager to share what they had witnessed with those who had remained inside. Others lingered in the garden, drawn to Rusty with a new reverence, though maintaining a respectful distance. Thomas approached his daughter, his weathered face showing traces of tears. "Your mother would have loved to see this," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. Sarah Jenkins had passed away 5 years earlier after a battle with cancer. She always believed there was more to life than what we could see with our eyes. "Maybe she did see it," Olivia suggested, finding comfort in the thought. "Maybe she's been watching all along." The DJ's voice called from inside, announcing that it was almost time for the last dance of the evening. As guests began filtering back into the reception hall, Daniel turned to Olivia with a question in his eyes. "What happens now? With Rusty, I mean. After everything we've learned today." Olivia looked at the horse who had been her companion for 14 years, who had carried a soul from another time, who had brought a century-old love story to its completion on her wedding day. "He comes home with us, of course," she said without hesitation. "Our home will be his home, just as it's always been." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As they prepared to return to the reception for the final dance, Thomas offered to stay with Rusty. "You two go on," he said. "This old man could use some quiet time under the stars, and I think Rusty might appreciate the company." Inside, as Olivia and Daniel took to the dance floor one last time, their guests gathered around them in a circle of support and celebration. The events in the garden had added a profound dimension to what had already been an extraordinary day, leaving everyone with a sense that they had been part of something truly magical. "Do you think we'll ever fully understand what happened today?" Daniel asked as they swayed together to the music. Olivia shook her head, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I don't think we're meant to understand it completely. Some mysteries are meant to be experienced rather than explained." As the final notes of the song faded away, the reception drew to a close. Guests began to depart, many pausing to embrace the newlyweds and share quiet reflections on the day's events. Words like miracle, blessing, and unforgettable were repeated again and again, along with promises to keep the more mystical aspects of the wedding day as a cherished community secret. When the last guest had departed and only the cleanup crew remained, Olivia and Daniel returned to the garden where Thomas sat on the stone bench beside Rusty, the candle still burning despite the late hour. "Ready to go home?" Olivia asked, approaching Rusty with the same affection she had always shown him, though now it was tempered with a new understanding. Rusty nickered softly, nudging her hand in response. The horse seemed different somehow, more settled, more at peace than he had been that morning when he had broken out of his stall with such determination. Thomas rose from the bench, stretching his back after sitting for so long. "I've been thinking about something," he said thoughtfully. "The land adjacent to your new place, the 10 acres with the old apple orchard. I was planning to sell it, but I think it would make a perfect pasture for Rusty. A wedding gift, if you'll accept it." Olivia's eyes filled with tears as she embraced her father. "Thank you, Dad. That would be perfect." As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Winters approached with Eleanor's journal tucked securely under her arm. "This belongs to you now," she said, handing it to Olivia. "And there's something else you should know. For decades I've been the keeper of not just the locket and the journal, but also of Eleanor's final request. She asked that when the circle was complete, when her descendant had found both human love and the returned soul of Michael, a new chapter should begin." "A new chapter?" Daniel asked, his arm around Olivia's waist. Mrs. Winters nodded, her eyes bright despite the late hour. Eleanor believed that once Michael's soul had completed its journey back to the Jenkins family, there would be a new purpose to fulfill. She wasn't specific about what that might be, but she was certain that it would reveal itself in time. As they walked together toward the waiting cars, Olivia and Daniel leading the way, with Thomas guiding Rusty behind them, The first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern sky. A new day was approaching, the first of their married life together, carrying with it the promise of both ordinary joys and extraordinary possibilities. 1 year later, Olivia stood at the fence of the pasture beside their home, watching as Rusty grazed peacefully among the apple trees now heavy with spring blossoms. Daniel joined her, wrapping his arms around her expanding waistline, his hands cradling the new life growing within her. "Have you decided on a name yet?" he asked, resting his chin on her shoulder. Olivia smiled, her hand automatically moving to touch the silver locket that she had worn every day since their wedding. "If it's a girl, Eleanor. And if it's a boy, Michael," Daniel finished for her, understanding completely. From across the pasture, Rusty lifted his head and looked toward them, his ears pricked forward with interest. In the year since the wedding, he had shown no further supernatural manifestations, returning to being simply a beloved horse, though one that everyone in Willow Creek now regarded with special reverence. Yet there remained a knowing gleam in his dark eyes, a wisdom beyond his years that suggested the soul within him was at peace, but still very much present, watching over the family that had finally, after a century of waiting, come full circle. As Rusty trotted toward them across the green pasture, his movements graceful despite his advancing years, Olivia felt a profound sense of completion and of new beginnings. The story that had begun with Eleanor and Michael had found its resolution in her and Daniel, but it was far from over. It would continue through their child, through the generations to come, a testament to the enduring power of a love strong enough to find its way home, no matter how long the journey or how impossible the odds. And in Willow Creek, whenever anyone spoke of true love or destiny, they would smile and say, "Remember the horse that walked into the church during the wedding? Now there's a love story for the ages."